Welcome back to Modern World History. We've been talking about imperialism. In this video, we talk about Japan during the age of imperialism. Now, in the same way that China was super isolated, we already discussed how under the Tokugawa shogunate, Japan had resorted to isolation as a means by which to preserve their traditions and prevent European influence. And we talked about this during the age of exploration. They also refused to do trade, like the Chinese refused to do trade, with Europeans. But in 1853, this is going to start to change as U.S. Commodore Matthew Perry strolled up into the harbor at Tokyo and presented them with a letter asking for diplomatic trade between Japan and the United States. The problem is, he also said, we're going to be back in a year expecting a response from Japan, and said it in a threatening way, which actually resulted in the creation of the Treaty of Kanagawa, in which the Japanese opened up two ports, gave extraterritorial rights, and also kind of opened up the door for other Western powers to eventually come in and do trade with the Japanese as well. So it looked like it was going to be a fast repeat of what happened in China in the previous video, but Japan is going to respond differently, and it's going to save them from European imperialism. So we call this period the Meiji Restoration. If you've ever watched The Last Samurai, then you have kind of an idea of what Japan was going through during this period. Of course, I understand if you haven't watched The Last Samurai, but you've seen Avatar or Fern Gully, you've still basically seen the same movie. Nevertheless, the Tokugawa shogun at the time stepped down from power, and power was handed to the Meiji Emperor, this guy right here. Alright, here's the deal, is that the Emperor had always been like a figurehead. He wasn't an actual leader. In all actuality, power was held by the shogun. But for the first time, the Emperor is going to be more than just a ceremonial figurehead. Well, he will become the actual leader of Japan. And this is seen by the Japanese people as a symbol of their nationalism. So, the Meiji Emperor, seen in the picture right here on the left, studied Western powers, and he understood German strength, government, the Constitution, their industries, the British Navy, the American universal education, still one of the few places where everyone can get education in the world today. And he looked at the Western industrial economy, and he was like, these are things that can help our people and help solidify our political presence in the world today. In 1890, Japan had become the strongest Asian country. All right. Now, also during this time, it's important to notice, as I have here in the bubble, that Japan is they're going to begin to become more imperialistic. Other countries that are dominating the global scene are imperial powers, and so Japan needs to do this as well. And part of this is going to result in the Sino-Japanese War, which was really kind of a war over Korea between Japan and China. Here's how it plays out. In 1885, China and Japan both mutually agreed that they would not occupy Korea. Now, you may not know this, but the Korean people on the Korean peninsula are their own separate nation. They're an ethnic group that is unique to just no one but themselves. There is also a language that is spoken exclusively by Korea. They have their own alphabet, their own culture. They are a nation unto themselves. In 1894, however, Chinese sent troops to help with a Korean uprising. And when this happened, the Japanese pounced on China, saying, you guys need to stay out of this. And they defeated China very easily and won Taiwan and the Pescadores Islands in the process. But this also gives Japan the power over the Korean people as well. In the next few years, the Russo-Japanese War is also going to occur. So the Russians have been working hard to modernize throughout this whole time period. And as we already discussed with their wars against the Ottoman Empire that was assisted by the British and the French, the Crimean War, the Russians were kind of seen as the weak man on the European scene. But Japan and Russia had conflicting interests when it came to Korea and Manchuria. And so Japan proposes that Russia stay out of Korea, and they would stay out of Manchuria and allow the Russians to maintain that area. But the Russians refused this agreement, and the Japanese end up launching a surprise attack on the Russians in Manchuria, and this led to the Russo-Japanese War, in which the Japanese were decisively victorious against the Russians. Now, this was handled in the Treaty of Portsmouth, which was mediated by Teddy Roosevelt in the United States, and it was also a humiliating loss for Russia that really goes to show how far Russia lagged behind other European nations, because everyone was thinking, well, Japan only just recently started to even modernize, and yet they were able to defeat the Russians. This is also part of what will ultimately lead to the Russian Revolution, as many Russians are completely disheartened and demoralized by the fact that they would lose to Japan in a war. Japan ends up taking Korea. By 1905, they take over completely, and by 1910, Korea was annexed, which means it was brought into the part of the state of Japan. The problem here is the Japanese were terrible to the Korean people, and they suppressed Korean businesses, shut down newspapers. They forced out Korean culture by preventing the Korean language from being learned by Koreans. And today, these issues that occurred during Japanese occupation of Korea still lingers, and there is still bitter resentment that exists between many Koreans and the Japanese, even to this day. In the next video, we take it back to the West, and we look at Mexico and United States conflicts of ambition. Thanks for watching.